Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
So I want to start just, I think one of the, a sort of really important backdrop to this whole episode for those who sort of kind of picked up on it or did pick up on it or whatever is like what's, right? We get the sense that Shvut, and even her name, and it didn't occur to me till today. Right, Shvut is a very unusual name, which means essentially settlement. That's what Shvut means. And you sort of piece together from Hodaya's interactions with her niece Shvut that so I guess it can be pieced together that her family was, lived in Gush Katif, which was the Israeli settlement in the Gaza Strip that was evacuated as part of the disengagement from, as under the Sharon government in 2005, as part of, they sort of pulled out of Gaza, and essentially Sharon said, it was sort of kind of like a attempt at peace, maybe, but more it was just saying like we don't think it's worth our time and particularly manpower to sort of be protecting these few Jewish settlements in Gaza. We're just going to pull out of Gaza, and like Gaza's overtaken by Hamas, like we're just pulling out. And there's this real sense of trauma of those people, including Shvut, who were there and lived through it, and were being told by their rabbis and their teachers and everyone else that, God wants you to be here. God is going to come through for you. And for us, God, don't leave, just pray. If you pray hard enough, and that's, what was touching on what Rabbi Barber was saying, right? It was sort of this sense of, maybe if you pray hard enough and really, really pray from the deepest depths, God will come through. And then it's sort of like, what happens when that doesn't happen? What happens when you're saying, okay, it's a test of my faith, and I'm gonna demonstrate my fullest faith and how devoted I am to this cause. And then, I'm just gonna share my screen for a moment and share a bit of this video. It's from a news segment from, 5 years ago. So, but talking about the disengagement,
זבל בכל מקום. היה אחרי מלחמה, והיה לא שלנו, והיה מוות. והבנתי שזה נגמר. אין נווה דקלים שאני מתגעגעת אליה ורציתי לחזור אליה. אין יותר. זה כבר לא קיים, ופשוט ההורים שלי נשארו שם עוד כמה ימים, אני כבר לא יכולתי להיות שם יותר.
הם לא ידעו מה יהיה, לאן ילכו, ובעיקר גילו לתדהמתם את הבועה. החיים בארץ נמשכו כרגיל.
בבוקר היית במלחמה, אשכרה מלחמה, צמיגים בוערים ברחובות, אנשים צועקים, בכי, חיילים עוקרים אנשים, טירוף. ואתה מגיע לכניסה לירושלים, ואנשים יושבים בבית קפה, והכל רגוע, ואתה רוצה לעמוד ולצרוח להם, מה נסגר איתכם? יש פה מלחמה, קורה פה משהו, והחיים שלכם ככה?
10 שנים אחרי...
Okay, are you able to see that? Okay. Yamit is different. that was in Sinai. To Robert's question. So, I just wanted to give a brief sense and, of sort of, and by the way, orange is was sort of the color of Gush Katif. So if you saw the orange flags, everyone wearing orange. I know like when I spent a Shabbat in Gush Etzion in Alon Shvut which is the settlement in the West Bank, and there was something, a class or something I went to, and there was this family that was all dressed in orange, not like t-shirts, but like the woman was wearing an orange dress and the kids had orange shirts and whatever. And whoever I was with, one of my rabbis was saying they only wear orange every day. All of their outfits are orange. And it's like a way of remembering and also signaling to other people that like we haven't given up on this cause. This is something that we still believe in. And, you really see that among a number of the people who lived in Gush Katif, that like, they still, in their hearts, they're still residents of Gush Katif. They just can't live there right now.
I remember that summer I was at Ramah that summer as a first-year counselor, and I remember that some of the Mishlachat, some of the Israelis who came, had orange like tied on their backpacks, and I mean we kind of knew what was going on, but we didn't recognize that it was like this political statement that they were making by having some kind of orange. It was like not a tassel, but it was like, I don't know, an orange like band almost, like wrapped around their backpack. Some of them, not all of them, which was part of the conversation of why do you have it but you don't? So it got brought. Is that where you're from? Renee, what do you mean? Am I from what? I'm wearing orange? I'm wearing a red shirt, but I guess it could be.
It could, yeah, it's orangish.
I had no idea what you were talking about. I'm definitely not from there. I'm definitely from Los Angeles. Anyway, okay, you can continue.
Oh, interesting. And Norm saying, he remembers seeing everyone wearing orange and getting to Tel Aviv and everyone saying wearing blue, which was the color of withdrawal, the withdrawal. And you even see, you sort of see it where Hodaya refers to it as the disengagement and her niece says Gerush, the expulsion, essentially. Is even the language of what word you use to describe what happened. You see that play out and how she's sort of lashing out there. And, one thing that just in that interview, that in that news segment, I don't know if people, could follow the Hebrew, but what one of these guys there was saying is like, we're in Gush Katif, and in our, during the evacuation, and like in our mind, this is like war. This is like the future of the Jewish people. This is like God, whatever, they felt this sense of like a divine mandate and almost like, a civil war type of thing. So keep in mind, Srugim was all filmed in, or aired between 2010 and 12-ish. Around, I think 2010 to 12. So, so this is right?
2008 to 2012.
8 to 12. Okay, so so it's
these
more
were 2008, the first season. I remember.
Right. So that was 3 years after the fact. So it's more recent history. Anyway, thinking about no, I lost my train of thought. With
being in Jerusalem.
Oh, right. Being in Israel, and and the people in Gush Katif thinking like this is everything. This is like, you can see from the video there of how people were being pulled out by soldiers, and they fortunately there wasn't really violent resistance. There might have been like a tiny bit of let's say semi-violent resistance, but like there weren't any battles or like real fights, but it was a lot of people who just sat in their houses and were dragged out, like you saw in that video there. But this guy who was being interviewed said, for us, this was like this incredible, not in a good way, but like just life-changing moment. And then you get to the entrance to Jerusalem and like people are sitting in cafes and having coffee. And it's like, life is normal. And they're like, what do you mean life is normal? Like, we just went through this life-changing experience. Like, we feel that, that this is like a huge moment in Israeli history, and people are just like living their normal lives. They don't experience that. And so I think you get a little bit of that with Shvut, the character, and just almost like needing to lash out as a way of, almost as a way of remembering, in a way of like feeling like, God didn't come through for us there. I think you've got, so one of the things we wanted to talk about today is sort of the religious element of that. Like, the whole episode, and we were talking about before, not the whole episode, but that at least storyline touches on struggles of faith. And one cause of struggles of faith like that is, when you put your faith in, let's say, when you attach religious significance to political outcomes, right? So there where people see settlement in the West Bank or Gaza as part of a religious mandate, and the religious leadership is telling them this is what God wants, and saying don't evacuate, God's going to come through. Like, how do you?
Our land.
Or this is our land, right? This is our land. This is our land from the Torah. The Torah says settle the land. Like, now what do you do when that doesn't come through the way you expect it? Like, how do you, like, what does that do to a person's faith? And I'm saying this is something that's very timely in America right now because of the ways that people, particularly a good chunk of the people who voted for Donald Trump for president, attach religious significance to him, that he's sort of, God's chosen one, or, God wants him there. And so, it's not just America. This happens in Israel. It happens, but like once you start attaching religious significance to current events and political outcomes, it becomes a whole different story of like what happens to a person's faith, and also like how does a person ever back down? It's very hard to compromise if something is religious mandate or God's will versus the political outcome that I hoped for, and it creates a whole lot of messiness in a whole lot of areas, which is like a little bit of what we see in this episode, but I think also what we see in our world right now. Yeah, Rabbi Shas, anything?
I just think that part of what we're seeing in this episode that is so powerful is that she is having a real moment of what it means to believe in something so strongly and not have that do anything, right? That belief doesn't provide action all the time. And whenever I think about that kind of attachment to a belief in God, I think about the Mishaberach and anybody who's ever prayed for someone to get better. And in so many ways, it's a very cathartic practice, right? That we say someone's name, that we bring them to mind, that we hope other people hear the names and bring them to mind as well. And for anybody who has lived in the modern day world, we also know that if you just pray for someone on a Mishaberach list and they don't get treatment, or they don't go to the doctor for a cold or whatever, they're not going to get better just because you say their name off of a Mishaberach list. And that, very personally, that is something that when my uncle was dying of cancer, that was really hard for me because I wanted to say his name. I wanted him to get better. And yet, kind of logically, I knew that just saying his name was not what was going to make him better. And so I think that in her case, in Shvut's case, in this episode, she's having that moment of, but I prayed so hard and I was doing everything that I was told to do that would kind of open up the heavens, right? She says she cried, she laughed, she sang as loud as she could, and nothing happened. And I think that where her aunt is so powerful in that moment is that she says to her, but you feel something still, even though it might not be this attachment and this love, you still feel something for that relationship with God. And as she says about herself, that's more than I can say. I don't have any attachment. I don't have any feelings. There's no anger, no annoyance, no love, nothing. There's nothing there anymore. It's just, it is what it is. Denise, I see your hand. I'm going to call on you. And then the other thing that I want to bring up is, I was mentioning this to Rabbi Pernick last night, that there's something very interesting about the way in which Shvut has left for the night. They have no idea where she is. And when she comes back home, they go through all these places that she could have been, and she slams the door and she goes into her room. And she says, I was at the kotel. Is that okay? And all of a sudden, everything's very calm. And as I was saying to Rabbi Pernick, like, if you've ever walked to the kotel late at night, like, that's not just like a walk in the park. That's not particularly safe either. And yet the Kotel seems to be this place, this experience of, okay, well, if you're going to the Kotel, everything was going to be fine. And so when she says she doesn't feel anything, I'm like, wait a second, you just bought into the Kotel being this really remarkable holy place. You must feel something or know something. So I thought that was a very interesting dissonance that I'm not even sure that they meant to write into the plot line, but that I picked up on in her character. Denise, did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I also noticed that about the Kotel. And I thought, because I feel like Hodiah has had all these struggles, with her faith, that when she went to the Kotel, that Hodiah understood, like, okay, you're really struggling with issues and you're not just acting out and going to clubs or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I felt like that kind of stopped her in her tracks of getting mad. But what I was going to say also, sorry?
No, go ahead. I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, no, because it delays on Zoom. So I forgot. Oh, just that I feel like a lot of times, I know this in my own life and with people that I've been close to and stuff, that like, I think when people have these things that they consider a crisis of faith or a failure of God, I think a lot of times it's a failure of human beings, and that, they were really given bad information because, any rabbi who tells you, the tanks are right there. No, just say another Shema. Like he's just irresponsible, but that's not God's fault. So I just wanted to make that pitch for God.
Well, I'm sure that God appreciates it. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of what we do in terms of saying that it's in the name of God, or that God will help us, or God will this, or God will that, you have to be able to see where you're also gaining support and help from people, because if you don't recognize that, then you're also not recognizing one of the first things that we're told in the Torah, which is people are made in the image of God. So if people are made in the image of God and you can't see God and you can't talk to God in a way that you can just, speed dial your way in, you need to be able to rely on people and to believe that they're made in the image of God to then feel that connection with them. There's that whole, you've all heard it, and people say it's midrash, people say it's a joke, anyway, I don't know where it's from, but the whole idea of the guy on the boat and all these things are sent to him, and then God says, yeah, but I sent you all those different devices. Why do I have to come and save you? So that's exactly what you're bringing up.
And also thinking that it's like very ego to think that what I want, whether it's the saving of a city or saving someone's life or whatever, like it's like thinking that we're on an equivalence with God, that we know what the right thing is, and if it didn't happen, it's his fault, not that we misunderstood something or lacked some information, but he got it wrong. And that's like, it's totally natural to feel that. I just think you can't really intellectually, honestly put that on God.
It's also it's an effective way for people to get you to do what they want you to do. Mm-hmm. To say God, meaning it's a manipulative device to this is not just what I want, this is God's will. But then when it doesn't happen, are you prepared, you who said this is God's will, are you prepared to deal with the ramifications of how are you going to now counsel those people who you told that this is God's will when it doesn't work out the way you said it was going to work out?
Yeah.
Rebecca and Leonard, you have your hand up.
Yeah. When I sort of consistent with when Shvut, is that it? When Shvut right away took off her skirt, and she's had her pants when she first met her aunt, and so she was clearly rebelling against her strict orthodoxy. So when I heard her say she went to the Kotel, my first thought was that, because she was hiding it, was that it was to participate in some sort of mixed gathering or service of men and women together or something. At first I thought, oh, is it like social, or no, is it religious? But something mixed, something forbidden, though it was at the Kotel. anyway, that was like my first thought.
Interesting. Just because you brought up this moment, I'll share a funny story from my own life. I love Mea Sharim. It's just probably a flaw. But I really like going there. It's where I bought all my books when I was living in Israel. I love going into Mea Sharim. And when you go into Mea Sharim, you dress the part, right? You put on a skirt and you have long sleeves and your collarbone is covered, and I didn't have to cover my hair, but those who are married would cover their hair. You put on all the garb. And I remember living in Israel because I didn't live so close, but I went to school so close to Mea Sharim, and I would like going. I would keep a long skirt in my backpack. And when I would there was a particular street that I would walk down, and right when you got to the entrance of Mea Sharim, I would stop and I would take a skirt out of my backpack and I'd put a skirt on over my pants if I wasn't wearing a skirt already. And I would go into Mea Sharim. And when I saw her do that, which was obviously the opposite, she took it off. But there is this very interesting piece of you almost become someone different when you have that skirt on or off, right? She was leaving home and taking that skirt off to then be in this secular world. And for me, it was the opposite. But it's interesting that played so much into her identity, right? That when she went to the Kotel, she knew how to dress and what to, where to go and all of that. And that was that was part of who she was. And her aunt goes through the same thing earlier on in the show, where she's having all these dilemmas of, I know what I'm supposed to look like and what I'm supposed to show you on the outside, but that's not who I am on the inside. Any other thoughts or questions about this? Norm, you look like you're about to say something.
I am. I was about to raise my hand. I think that leaders and ordinary Jews often feel like they want to make God do their will rather than for them to do God's will. And it amazes me that people can buy into promises that, yes, we should occupy this and God will be on our side when, we have a couple thousand years of history, if not more, definitely more, that show us that you can't count on God to do what you want him to do when you want him to do it, or in any kind of timely fashion.
Not in the way that you want it to be done,
Certainly not the way you want it to be done. And that happens when you're praying for somebody to survive and recover sometimes. And it certainly applies to deciding what part of Israel we're going to settle in and expect to be safe there. It just isn't something you can count on divine intervention.
Yeah. Karen, you have your hand up.
If she's so not feeling anything and she's struggling, why is it such a problem with the boyfriend? Now, it probably is because he's not Jewish enough. He's not observant enough. He's not anything.
Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Sorry. And
a lot of she's. I just didn't know what she we were talking about. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. But, and I know because she's maybe not made a decision to not be religious, and she's still on the fence and doing that, and he not being very religious, maybe you know what I'm saying? I don't feel like, at least you have this, but yet she can't be with him because he's not religious enough.
Yeah, I think being with him then decides for her that she can't be wishy-washy any longer, and she still needs to be wishy-washy to figure out who she is.
But he's willing to go along with it and learn, from what I understand.
Yeah, but you also don't flip a switch and one day all of a sudden you're frum or one day all of a sudden you're secular. So I think she feels like taking him along his journey, and Rabbi Pernick, you can chime in if you want, but taking him along his journey, that would be a ton of work for her to do when she's trying to take herself along her own journey and they're going in opposite directions. So I don't know. That's just my take. I don't have any sources to prove that for you, but did you want to say anything on that, Rabbi Pernick?
No, I think you're right. It's interesting that when it comes to Shavuot, right? She's going to the kotel. She's like, she's wants that connection. She does. I mean, and she feels a connection. She's angry, but anger is right, as I said, that's displays you have a relationship, you have feelings. And like for Hodia, it seems to be, I think, in a lot of ways, less about God and more about
observance.
So, society, her family, these kinds of things. Like she doesn't feel. I mean, even the scene at the end when you hear the sirens, in Jerusalem, the sirens go off 40 minutes before Shabbat starts. That Shabbat's coming, and she's there watching TV and kind of staring, as her niece said. She said, "What are you watching?" She's like, "I'm not watching, I'm just staring." But she's sitting there staring at the TV as Shabbat's coming in, and it's almost like you feel that sense of, when her niece did the same thing, it's almost like removing yourself. It's like you don't know what to do. So you're just kind of sitting and, detaching. It almost feels like detachment.
Interesting that you thought that it was the TV. When I was watching it, I also was like, oh, is that the TV? And then I think it was the radio behind her, which doesn't make
She's watching the TV too. She turns on the TV.
At the end?
At the very end, yeah.
It was a TV?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was the radio, which was behind her, because that's how the scene panned to the radio. But it's interesting. Doesn't matter which vessel it was. You shouldn't be doing it on Shabbos. but
it wasn't quite Shabbos yet. But
okay, thank you, Rabbi. But I think that there is something interesting. If it was the radio, there is something interesting that she's just she doesn't even really care. Like it's on, and she's just sitting there, and she doesn't do anything about it. She doesn't seem to care that it's on, but she also doesn't seem to care enough that Shabbat's coming in to turn it off. Meanwhile, when I heard I don't even live in Israel, and when I heard the siren, I was like, what am I supposed to do? And then I realized it's A, not Shabbat, and B, I don't live in Israel, and I'm watching a TV show. But there is like that visceral reaction of, oh my gosh, Shabbat's about to be here. I need to do something, for those of us who have lived in Israel. And that, what?
Jerusalem,
excuse me. Anyway, you took me off my train of thought. So there we go. Does anybody want to say anything about the kotel? No. Okay.
Well, it obviously has symbolic value, and to pick any possible location for where she was trying to find her religious inner self in Jerusalem, that's it.
Yeah. It is stereotypically it, right? And that to me was what was so interesting, that there are many other places in Israel that you could go that would be, potentially just as spiritually powerful, but she goes to the place that most people would connect to an idea of like the highest level of spirituality. And she tries to find that connection there. I don't know. Did anybody else have any feelings about that? About the fact that she went to the kotel? Yes, Norm.
The first time I was at the kotel, in 1975, I had just a tremendously moving experience. It was a Friday afternoon. We participated with 3 different minyanim, one for Mincha, one for Kabbalat Shabbat, and one for Ma'ariv. And the entire gestalt, the entire experience was absolutely amazing to me and wonderful. And on my subsequent visits, it has been very disappointing. But I think that it's reasonable that somebody who is coming from a frum background, is considering leaving that, is being somewhat disillusioned, might go there to see if she finds some spiritual connection, especially if she has in the past found that.
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking for it, right? Like the fact that she goes there means she's looking. She's missing it.
And I think that when she said that was where she was, it wasn't that her aunt feels like, oh, that's okay, so much as she understands that she wasn't out partying. She's having a spiritual crisis, which Shvut is having. And I understand that. I'm looking forward to being by Zoom or Facebook at the Kotel tomorrow morning, since it's Rosh Chodesh.
Right.
But it's, I think that was the thing, that the aunt at that point recognized she's going through a spiritual crisis, and that changed things.
Yeah. Right. Rebecca and Leonard, and then I have lots to say about the Kotel. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that she went to the Kotel, because that seems to be a universal spiritual center for a lot of people. I think I was going to share that our daughter went on the Birthright program to Israel just over a year ago, and the counselor, the head counselor, had asked the parents ahead of time to write your student a letter about, spirituality, and encouraging them, because for a lot of attendees, part of the objective is to create a spiritual bond with Israel. And they gave them the letters, and we knew they were going to right before they visited the Kotel. So that was a, purposely designed part of the program that, with all the emotionality that comes with a visit to the Kotel. So it seemed appropriate that Shvut would try to go there to feel something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone who's been to the Kotel, I'm sure you've seen people who are there just, davening, because that's where they daven, or people who are there crying over a Siddur or a book of Tehillim or whatever it is, really finding a lot of connection in that particular spot, for whatever they're asking for, whatever they're pleading for, whatever they're grateful, whatever it is that they're doing, there is an emotional reaction that most people have when or not most people, I shouldn't say it that way, that people go there to find, and that some people have when they are in that spot. Rabbi Pernick, do you have anything to say about the Kotel, or
which one?
Which Kotel?
No, which Rabbi Pernick?
Oh, it's like the Kotel? I was referring to you. Your dad's always welcome to speak.
One thing I'm thinking about is it's not just the Kotel, but I think a number of, equivalent things. Like, so much, I think, is about how the experience is framed also. Like, I remember one trip to Israel, I think it was when I was like a senior in high school, and it was a synagogue trip, so it was with my dad. And my dad can attest to this or say if I'm saying wrong, but I think if I remember correctly, like the tour guide just like didn't make a big deal about when we like entered Jerusalem. It was sort of like, we're on the bus, and it was like, okay, now we're in Jerusalem. And like my dad sort of was like, okay, we're gonna like sing Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, because there was like that sense of like, like in order for people to feel, not necessarily, but in a lot of ways, like in order to feel something, you need to frame the experience, you need to set it up, you need to build the anticipation, right? Like that's part of this, that you're sort of saying, okay, now we're going to go to this spot where you can see it from afar, and you're sort of building it up, because like without any of that, it's a wall, so look, there are the people who just on their own go to the Kotel and feel it because they sort of know of the religious significance that's attached to it. But I think so much of it is also about like the framing of the experience. And, it's worth wondering with someone like Shvut, who's saying like, I'm not feeling anything. I'm just gonna like walk to the Kotel and see if I feel something, without like, it's not a magic box, like it's a wall. It's not just, for most people on its own, going to suddenly inspire feelings when you're not having feelings. Like you need to be in a place where you're, I don't know, like open, or you're like ready for that. And I think, she's sort of hoping, I don't feel anything, I'm going to go there and see if something pops up. And it's like, nope, don't feel it. And I think that's often like a downside of places like the Kotel, and we sort of, expect or imagine that like they can do the magic for us, and like it's a wall, like it's not going to suddenly make everything better for you. For most people, some people like do feel, and are crying over their Tehillim books and whatnot, but it's like something else.
Your dad is unmuted. To say something?
I am unmuted now, yes. I tried to comment before, but it was like the TV commercial. Yeah, it's like, okay. So to go back to a different generation that some people here will connect with, the first time I went to the Kotel, which was like probably 1972 or 3, and or maybe it was even after that. But I remember somebody said to me, it was like the scene in The Godfather, the original Godfather movie, and everybody back then was talking about the horse's head in the bed, the horse's head in the bed, the horse's head in the bed. And you see the movie, and it's like, okay, there's a horse's head in the bed. It's like, okay, you've already heard so much about it. You get there, and like Josh says, it's a big wall. It's always been a place that's been tough for me to really feel a strong connection with, because it's, I don't know, it just, I've known some very, very Orthodox traditional Jews who said they wish it was, that it was destroyed, that it's like it's an idol, because people come and they're like worshiping the wall instead of worshiping God. And, it's a wall. It's not a wall of the temple. It's, most people don't even know what it really is. So it's significant, and I think for some people, the illustration I've used is you've got a guy and he sings once upon a time. He sings in your neighborhood bar, right? And he's just a guitar player or whatever in your neighborhood bar. Somebody discovers him a year later and he's like this national celebrity, and, you're paying $500 a ticket to go to a concert, but he's the same singer that nobody wanted to really, that not all that many people saw. People feel, oh, well, we're supposed to feel it. So we try to feel it. And, I'm just curious about any of the rest of the people here who may have been either with the Kotel or something comparable. Because, to me, it's kind of like people walk into synagogue and it's like, okay, God, hit me. I walked in, I didn't feel anything. It's like, well, that's, we quote, the sages of old would meditate and pray for an hour that they would be able to have, it's just, you don't just go into synagogue and just like, okay, go. But I think that's what a lot of people do.
You'll appreciate this, and I'm sure you've heard of this, but Rabbi Elliot Dorff talks about prayer like a baseball game, that you can't assume that you're going to hit a home run if you don't go up to bat. And so you have to he does it much better and talks about baseball stuff that I don't understand. So you can read it some other time and you'll get it. But that's the basic gist. But the idea that if you do go to the Kotel or to Shul or whatever, and you just expect that this spiritual experience is just like going to come over you, well, then you're not stepping up to that plate, right? You're not taking a swing at what could be something that is meaningful to you. You're just expecting it to happen for you. And I will say before I call in Norm that the first time I went to the Kotel, I felt exactly that way. Like, this is so overwhelming. I don't need to be here. I was 18, I think, the first time I went to Israel. And my mom, physically pushed me to the wall and said, just touch it. Just be in this moment and touch the wall. And I remember getting very emotional. And I don't really know why. And I think that it was just that it had been built up. I went to Jewish day school my whole life. It had been built up as this very spiritual place for so long that I was actually too overwhelmed to want to approach it. And then when I was there, I felt that connection, not in a prayerful way, more in a historical, this is a really cool place way. But that I can imagine how people feel that, especially if they're kids who have heard about this place for so long, and then they're being told, okay, now pray here, and they expect that something is just going to wash over them because it's such a spiritual place, and that just doesn't always happen. Norm, and then Renee.
That first time I remember it was very moving, but part of it is that I was very much aware that it only been in Jewish hands for a very short time. At that point, after a very long exile.
Yeah.
And when my grandmother went to Israel, she was not able to visit because it was still in Jordanian hands. So for me, it was a very moving thing. And the person I was traveling with, he was the first Weisberg to go to Israel. I was not the first Green, but he was the first Weisberg ever to go to Israel. And he was tremendously moved. And it was the entire atmosphere walking to there on Friday afternoon and it was very exciting. We were traveling as part of a tour group, but this was not a group activity. It was just the two of us who'd gone down there. And we foolishly had not even made arrangements for dinner that night. And we ended up being able to still buy a ticket at the hotel that many of our friends were at, but not the hotel that we were at. We didn't try there. But it was an entirely special occasion for us. And so I think that people sometimes feel a real strong connection to that kind of a thing, but especially then because it was only a few years since the Jews had taken it in a very heroic and exciting, dramatic event in the 67 war. And that was very clear in our minds at the time, even though it was already after 73, it was still a very clear and exciting time.
Yeah, Renee.
I also find Yerushalayim very spiritual and emotional. I mean, even whenever I go and just driving up to getting there, I just start to feel all warm and fuzzy. And it's really interesting that many Israelis that I know, including one that I know particularly well that I live with, aren't fond of Jerusalem at all. They don't see that connection to Jerusalem at all. And he's not alone. I mean, a lot of his friends and a lot of our friends that we know in Israel and family that we have in Israel feel the same way. It's like Jerusalem doesn't really do anything for them. Oh, it's just, it's just like Ramadan.
Ramadan's also pretty nice. It's true. I lived in Jerusalem and I love Jerusalem, but yeah, for some people, it is a place that there is kind of so much. It's similar to what Rabbi Pernick was saying. That it's similar. It is like putting yourself in a place where there is so much that you're supposed to feel and so much you're supposed to imagine and so much you're supposed to feel connected to that people feel like it's a letdown, right? That there's all this buildup and then you get there and you visit and you're like, well, this is a city, just like Tel Aviv was a city and New York is a city, right? It's not, people don't feel that connection. And sometimes I think that's why the Kotel for me is not necessarily the place that if I were trying to find that connection, I would go, because I think that it's actually the nooks and crannies in the country as a whole, but specifically Yerushalayim, that I have found much more connection, because those aren't the places where it says on the wall, this king, blah, 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 here. And, it doesn't go through all of that kind of, like historical importance that then is supposed to make you feel something, but it's just a really remarkable place. And you're in this case, Jerusalem, and you feel a certain way.
And I think they see it as more controversial too. It's a more controversial city than some of the other cities.
Right. You could go down one street and you're in one kind of quarter, and you go down another street and you're in a whole other type of city. So yeah, for sure. And for others, that's part of the beauty, right? Of being able to step one foot into one part of culture and existence and step out and you're in another.
No, but I mean, even more like, they don't associate fighting with Ramadan, but they do associate it with Yerushalayim. Sure. So in that sense, I see it as controversial.
Sure. Robert, did you have something to say? There
you go. My very first time in Israel, we were taken immediately to the wall that evening on, I think it was Erev Shabbat. And I remember feeling first, I was 20 years old, I was scared because it's the center of terrorism in Israel. But but more importantly, I think that Jerusalem, and especially at the wall, it was one of the few focal points on the planet. Where you had three religions right there. And so, of course, the Kotel is our center point, but you have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you have the Dome of the Rock, or the other a mosque. So anyway, it's the center of free religions. There aren't too many places that like that. And I've been to Kyoto in Japan, and Kyoto was a very religious center of religion in there. Mm-hmm. And I got that sense in Kyoto. But anyway, in Jerusalem, to be in a focal point of not just my religion, but two others, was very special. It was more than just a spiritual thing. I think the spirituality didn't enter my head that much, but as far as being Jewish and what the place represented, did.
Yeah. I'll say one thing, and then Rabbi Pernick, you can say whatever you want. I think the part of what for many, what?
Okay.
I think part of what for many people, the idea of the kotel, or specifically what Shvut goes through in the episode, a lot of it has to do with being connected to something, right? And going to the kotel, you're connected to a lot of other people. Yep, there's a mechitza. I'm not going to talk about that, but the idea that you're with a lot of other people and that they're all there to do exactly what you're there to do. And so you're part of a community. And I think that part of what people have as an interest in terms of just any kind of faith connection is feeling part of something. And for Shvut, the thing that she was part of was then destroyed and taken away from her. So even though, and Rabbi Pernick was talking about kind of the political piece of this, but even in a moment where her belief system was so rooted in taking care of the land that she lived on and the home that her family had built and created as a statement, that then not only did that go away, but her belief in that community and the reason for that community went away. And I think that then going to the kotel is a way of kind of making that puzzle piece whole again, figuring out if when you go to a place that a lot of other people are going to be feeling a spiritual connection, can you then feel that when you're there? I did a honeymoon Israel trip as the rabbi, not one of the honeymooners, which let me tell you, doing the trip as a rabbi is great because everyone else, has to spend all this time with someone else. And I got a room to myself and it was very fun. But you go on this trip and the first thing you do is you go to Jerusalem, and the first thing they want you to do is go to the kotel. And because it's predominantly interfaith couples, they don't expect that you're going to just go to the main kotel plaza and that people are going to know what to do, right? Many of these people have not stepped foot into a synagogue that has a mechitza, and so saying, you go this way, you go that way, to couples, specifically heterosexual couples who are thinking that they're going to be together, that's very jarring. So we go to the Robinson's Arch portion, which is right before you enter the main plaza. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with them for Kabbalat Shabbat because, again, many of them were not particularly Jewishly connected or literate. And I thought for that moment, this is the only part of the kotel where they can do something together. So I had them approach the wall, which is much smaller than when you go to the main plaza, so they couldn't all do it at the same time. But I had all heterosexual couples, and I had them go up to the wall, and I had one person put their hand on the wall and the other person put their hand on their partner. And that was really emotional for me, whether or not I think that part of the wall is the kotel or not. That moment of being able to have those couples be part of that experience of the kotel together was something so special that people don't usually get, because usually when you go to the kotel, you're separated from a partner, or at least from someone else who you might be going there with if they're of the opposite gender. So anyway, I often think of the kotel, no matter which third of it you're visiting, that it is a part. You feel like you are part of something very large and something where people can come and feel that connection.
I guess just to wrap us up, we started off by talking about sort of the political dimension and the Gush Katif component and and then sort of transition to talking about the Kotel piece. But I think, part of what Rabbi Schatz was just saying, touches on that video that we played at the outset of, the people who were evacuated, kicked out, whatever word you want to use, of Gush Katif, who were saying this was for us like the world ending, and then you go to Jerusalem and it's sort of like everyone's in cafes drinking coffee and it's like nothing happened. And so I think that, it sort of ties together these pieces of, part of that faith experience is that feeling of being connected to something larger. And I think that's part of what Shvut is struggling with, is like how to find faith when like the thing that she was connected with is now gone and no one seems to care. And she's kind of going to the Kotel, which is another place in which people feel that connection. But there's something that's missing there, because and some people feel like, oh, this is a place where I feel that connection to everyone else. But there's just kind of a brokenness in that relationship, and whether it's the community and the connection, that, as we've talked about, it's not going to just magically heal because you go to a place and, suddenly things are renewed. There's sort of a deeper level there of that brokenness that, you feel like she's experiencing, and she's looking for that connection to what she felt growing up, of feeling like she's doing God's work. And, again, her name is Shvut. Like, her parents clearly from a very young age have like pushed like that your job in this world is to settle this land. And so she's, I think part of what she's missing is that feeling of like doing God's will. And she's seeking it. She's trying to find it. And in its absence, she's lashing out. But that lashing out, I think, speaks to that desire, to find what she felt like she once had.
And interestingly, her aunt is finding that in her Shabbat community, whether or not that is a connection to God, right? And this could open up into a larger conversation of just Jewish identity in general, right? You don't necessarily have to believe in God to have a strong connection to your Jewish identity or your Jewish culture, but you can feel connected to a faith and to belief in something by just being around that community, which her aunt is doing in a very different way, and yet is coming across those feelings and those struggles also. Okay, we have 2 episodes left of this. Oh, Robert, would you like the final word? And then the other Rabbi Pernick. Ooh, we have 2 final words.
Okay.
Yeah.
One quick comment. The Kotel is a remnant of the Second Temple that was destroyed, and her settlement was also destroyed. So she's going to a place that was destroyed to maybe find some answers related to where she came from.
A remnant of a retaining wall, we should know. Not a remnant. The Kotel is a remnant of the retaining wall around.
Right.
But yes. Right.
But it's still a place of holy destruction,
Yeah, it's a great connection.
It is, yeah. Padre.
I think we're kind of saying we have to create our own memories. And in terms of the example before, you can't hit a home run unless you step up to bat. But I always use the example as a runner. And this is true for baseball. It's true for musicians. It's true for, rabbis and others. You need to warm up. You need to prepare before you get up to the plate. Otherwise you're not going to do your best. So, I think that's part of it. And I would just say that, I remember there was a moment many years ago, and I have this thing where when I go to Israel, the first night, I always wake up at 3 a.m. The jet lag or whatever, it just happens. There's nothing I can do about it. I know it's going to happen. And so I took a cab from the one of the hotels in Jerusalem, which of course they go through different names every few years, but this is one of the ones where they were quarantining everybody in, and the people revolted. The Dan Panorama on Karen Hayesod. Anyhow, little long for a walk at 4:30 in the morning. But at 4:30 in the morning, I took a cab to the hotel because it's like, I'm up, what am I going to do? And it was one of the very few times where I felt a sense of awe at the hotel, because I realized at that moment I was the only person in the entire world who was at the hotel. There was nobody else there. And I was like, okay, that's neat, But I would also advise that I hate to put it this way, but for the men who are here, if you go in the cave that is off to the side, that to me is a much more, if you will, authentic experience. And it can be very, very moving there, because that's not the glitz and the glamour. That's just, you're looking at, and even to go through for people of all genders, to go through the Western Wall excavations, the tunnel, that's really neat, because you can really, to me, you really have a sense of history. But it's like most things, we get out of it what we put into it. And a lot of people aren't willing to put that much in, but they want to get a lot out.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end and a great message. So we have 2 episodes left of this series. We are going to be can I announce this?
Yeah.
We are going to be keeping class at the same time, even for next season. So Karen's very happy about that, which is great. So nothing will change. We can maybe do a little bit of a see-you in 2 weeks. But if you know of anybody who wants to start with us when we start a season, that'll be the first week of February. So they can catch up on the whole first season and then join us for the second if they would like. And we'll see you next week. Really nice to see you all. Have a great week.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.